All right, so welcome everybody to Surrender, a last arguments of King video podcast. My name is Rob, and I have a couple of guests who are not Josh with me today. So first, I would like to introduce. He is a full library of various game lore. He may or may not be a possible cannibal, and he's one of my closest friends, Mr. Brett.
Hello.
And joining me, a very special guest we are putting some community spotlight on. He is a 3D sculptor, he's a painter, and I hear a little bit of a cinephile.
A little bit.
Studio.
It is true. I have watched a movie or two, and I may or may not have terrible opinions on them. But thank you so much for having me.
Oh, absolutely. Glad to have you. How are you gentlemen doing tonight?
I'm 3 or 4 drinks deep, so I can't be doing too bad.
That's what Friday nights are for. So we have a bit of an interesting show. A lot of different kind of segments going on. We got starting up. We're gonna talk with Thunderhead here about all his work he's doing, his Twitch channel, his sculpting and printing. And then we're gonna be diving deep into a kind of 100 Kingdoms overall discussion about the faction, you know, the tactics, the lore, the aesthetic, and all that. And then we're going to be ending the show with a bit of community spotlight on a local game store, Webwave Games in Marlborough, Mass. I have a little package I put together from our Conquest demo day we did a couple of weeks ago. So we will end with that. But first, Mr. Thunderhead, would you like to tell us who you are and why?
So, first of all, let me address the fact that it is incredibly validating for me to be introduced as a 3D sculptor. It's just my heart swells. I've been playing tabletop games for the last just over 20 years. I've always had kind of a creative flair to me, but my young life was I ran off and I served in the military. That was what I wanted to do straight out of high school. So I hauled off and I joined the army, and I was a linguist, and that was all not terribly interesting. But while I was in, actually before I was in, I took a trip to, and this is the only story I'll really indulge in. I took a trip with my family to England, and I was in Stirling in the UK when, with my family, we were going to Stirling Castle, I remember. And
Fantastic place.
It really is. We were there for the changing of the guard. They were walking down the road towards Stirling Castle to see the changing of the guard, and young me, I must have been 8 or 9, really. I was really very young. I turned my head, I distinctly remember, to the left. And I beheld a sign, and that sign said Games Workshop. And I was like, what could that possibly be? So I went in.
So you want to know what's funny? Not to interrupt you.
No, please go ahead.
Actually, my first experience with wargaming was in London at a Games Workshop.
It's the heart of it. That's where they got their start. Those Nottingham nerds, man.
Yeah, it was like insane. They had like this, it was like Helm's Deep or Minas Tirith, and they had like a step stool you had to get on in order to like access the walls. And I'm like, what the fuck is this?
I remember very distinctly, I went in, and later I would be in a great amount of trouble because my family wandered off and I went in another direction. They had no idea where I was, but that's another story. I wandered into this place labeled Games Workshop, wondering what could this possibly be, and there were a couple of gentlemen there who were on opposite ends of a very large table. I would later learn is approximately 6 foot by 4 foot. And they had a series of models that they had built and painted themselves, and they were space elves of all things, and I believe Iron Warriors, Chaos Space Marines. What do these words mean? What is any of this? And I've described these men a number of times when telling this story, and more for the last 5 years, I've realized that I'm just describing myself. But yeah, they were a couple of bald, bearded gentlemen with glasses. And I'm like, oh no, I've turned into them. but in more ways than one. But they were very kind, and they explained to me how the game worked, and they showed me how to roll the dice, and they were like, okay, so I've got my ballistic skill, and he has his defense, and we're gonna do the thing. And I was like, oh my god, this is incredible. And that day started something that continues through to the modern day. I love tabletop wargaming. I do vastly more, I think many of us do, building and painting of minis than I do playing the games. I have bursts of time when I get many, many more games in, and I really, really get into the game design aspects of it. But I would say, as much as I'm into the playing of the games, I'd say like a 60-40 interest in the models, the aesthetics, and the painting. It depends. Definitely for the last 2 years, I think it's been hard for a lot of us to get out and play games. So my interest has veered very much into the model making. I think a lot of people's has. But I cannot tell you how excited I am for 2022, for the return of conventions, for getting out there to things like I'm US based, so Adepticon. I want to go to Gen Con next year. Like, I'm really trying to get out there. Particularly since in the last 2 years, narrowing it more down to myself, I have sort of accidentally started a business called Thunderhead Studio.
Yes,
and I say accidentally. Yes, I say accidentally because it really started because, like, I've always liked BattleTech. I played Mech Warrior 3, Mech Warrior 4, Mech Warrior 5 when I was a kid. There's been a relatively recent, last couple of years, Kickstarter from Catalyst Game Labs that has really sort of boosted BattleTech into a realm where it has models that aren't embarrassing, if I'm being totally honest. I've tried to get people into BattleTech before, and I've literally had experiences where I've set up whole tables for people and had them come in, and I've been like, look at my plastic and metal models, and they've gone, maybe I'll play something else. So I think it's fair to say that the models for BattleTech until recently have been middling between, like, nostalgically charming and awful.
Yep.
But CGL has done a fantastic job of updating the line. They have a lot of really modern, excellent sculpts. Also, the proliferation of 3D printing, which is something that I'm very, very big on, is very big in BattleTech. People have been taking the MechWarrior Online sculpts and 3D printing them for years now, which is really where I got started. But I wanted to make, and if you'll indulge me for just a second, I went to a game locally. I live near Denver. I went to a game that was meant to be the Battle of Tukid, which is a famous battle in the BattleTech universe towards the end of what is called the Clan Invasion, where the savage, honor-bound clans invaded the Inner Sphere, and they were defeated by a clever honor duel, effectively, on a particular planet, where a group called Comstar sort of lured them into close combat that they weren't prepared for, and beat them at their own game, and essentially convinced them to leave by their own code of honor, big quotes. I'm not a big fan of the clans. But I played in this game, this Battle of Tukid game, and it was meant to be the Inner Sphere beat the clans by luring them into urban environments where they were not prepared to fight in close quarters, and then, like, chop them to bits with swords and axes and shit on big robots. Which, wait, am I allowed to curse? Are we cursing tonight?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. Okay.
Fuck them kids.
Okay, fantastic. So they hacked them to pieces with motherfucking axes. And I always loved that. I thought that was one of the coolest things. So I build my force. I make my clan buster Black Knights with their 5-ton swords. I got my hatchet men with their axes. I'm like, I'm going to lure them in. I'm going to hack them to pieces. I'm going to shit in their mechs. It's going to be awesome. And we go to play the game, and there's not a lot of terrain, and the clans stand back in the hills, and they bombard our buildings until they're dust, and they pick us apart at ranges that we can't possibly. And on that day, I swore a blood oath. And that oath was that I would make terrain.
You know what? If anything,
and that terrain would destroy them.
This episode is amazing just from Brett's reactions to your story. I was just watching.
I can see him responding to this, and I'm glad that you also have that fire for BattleTech, because it's a big part of my fandom. But I swore on that day that I would make them suffer, that they would be destroyed, that there would be a second chance. And on that day, there would be terrain. There would be tight, close, urban terrain in which they could not utilize their long-range weapons. And thus was born Trinity City, which I made entirely for myself, which you can find on SteelWarriorStudios.com for sale both as STLs and physicals. And someone contacted me after I started making this. Alex from Steel Warrior Studios, where that's available, contacted me and said, hey, I'd like to sell some of your stuff. Would you mind that? I'm like, oh, okay, sure, that sounds fine. And over the course of 2 years, to skip a great number of events in the name of brevity, that turned into a terrain making business. And I have expanded my 3D design. I came from nothing. I've never done 3D design before. Like 2 years ago when I picked up Fusion 360 and I just started fooling around. And it's really turned into something pretty cool. I love doing it, and I try to keep my brain out of the business side of things, and I really just try to make things that I want to have. I play my games and I'm like, I want to have this thing that does this for my games. I need to make it and then make it available. This is my primary design philosophy. Bringing that around to Conquest, I discovered Conquest through a streamer called Walter's Workshop on Twitch.
Yep.
I didn't get into it for a long time until I saw the Spire Elves, and I was like, this is weird. This is really kind of upsetting. This is like H.R. Giger having a fever dream over here. What the hell is that giant ant? What is it doing?
It's funny that you say ant, because it is an ant.
It is.
It has an
interestingly
ant
enough, like we're talking about 100 Kingdoms tonight. I'm honestly, like, as much as I am a 100 Kingdoms player, and I love the 100 Kingdoms, and I'm certain we're going to talk about that. I weirdly know more about the Spires lore than I do about the 100 Kingdoms lore. The Spires have very, very interesting lore. The 100 Kingdoms lore is interesting, but it's also kind of interchangeable with... it has a lot of elements of real history to it, which is what I think is kind of interesting about the 100 Kingdoms, particularly the aspect of the sort of economic revolution that they're undergoing.
Yes.
I think that's fascinating. But at the same time, when I really read about the lore, I'm like, yeah, but then there's the space elves with the giant root systems of bone tendrils and clones, and I want to read about that.
Well, I mean, I always tell people when people are like, well, what's the lore of Conquest? I always say, start with the Spires, because they are the source of all bad things that happen in the world.
Yeah. Honestly, I think the strength of the 100 Kingdoms is that they are fairly generic. And I won't go into that right now, but there's something I'd like to talk about. Right.
So, since we brought around the Conquest...
To contain all of that, I'm a big fucking nerd, and I make terrain, guys.
Yeah,
I like robots, and I like fantasy battles. I'm a big Lord of the Rings guy.
Yeah, I mean, me too. I mean, both of us are. We could talk about Lord of the Rings all day.
I would list the games that I play, but it's most of them.
Yeah. How much time you got?
Yeah, like right now, I'm on Middle Earth strategy battle game, Conquest, BattleTech. Dead Zone 3rd edition just came out. Beyond the Gates of Antares, Maelstrom's Edge from Daka Daka. Like, I love tabletop gaming. I love it. I love the experience of standing across the table from a friend. I'm not huge into the competitive scene, pickup games, but like from a friend who I respect, who I enjoy playing with, and the experience of playing against that person, of playing the mind games that go on in a tabletop game. Mm-hmm. I absolutely love it. Also, honorary mention for Rune Wars, the miniatures game. Rest in peace.
Rip.
Arguably my favorite game in the last 15 years.
Press F to pay respects.
Yep. Moment of silence for Rune Wars.
It was a brilliant game. But better lore than people gave it credit for, too.
Yeah, I almost got Rune Wars when it first came out, but I never pulled the trigger. So I guess I'll never know. But it
suffered from a super slow release. They slow rolled it, and it hurt them badly, and it was a mistake.
Mm-hmm. So, yes, 3D printing in Conquest. So, talk a little bit about what you got going on there.
So, as a 3D printer, I think you have to be conscious of certain things. That being that you are producing product to go with a game whose owner produces product that you don't necessarily want to compete with. And I think that there's a careful balance to be had there. I know the Games Workshop is, they're the largest. They had their issues with like Chapter House miniatures and stuff where they were making minis for models that should exist in the game but didn't yet, and Games Workshop didn't like that. There's a balance to be found there. And certain companies are friendlier to 3D printers than others are. Certain companies are more willing to embrace the technology. Other companies are not. If you want my broad opinion on 3D printing, I can compact that into one simple concept, which is technology is a freight train. And you have two choices. You can stand in front of it and get run over, or you can get on board and you can help steer it. You don't really have any other choices. If you think you're going to stand in front of it and stop it, you're just fucking delusional. And I don't think that Games Workshop is delusional. I think they have enough market share, and I think they have enough adaptability that they can afford to stand in the way for a while before they find how they're going to embrace it. But I will say that the people from Conquest have been very, very friendly to me, and I really appreciate that. They've reached out to me. They've sent me some free models. They've complimented me on my stream and my Instagram, and I really appreciate that. They've actually they seem like a bunch of really great guys. But bringing that back to something relevant, as a 3D printer, I try not to make things like replacement parts. I try not to say like I made this thing and this is a proxy for something that you can buy. I'm like, they're selling that model. Even if I don't love the model, I don't want to replace it. I want to make things that will complement the game, that will improve your gameplay experience, accessories or items that are just going to make playing the game easier, faster, more fun. I'm a big believer in the notion. I love wargaming terrain. I love looking at a board and seeing all the pieces on it that make it look like a real environment, that make it so involving. I've been burned by games like War Machine Hordes, where the nature of the game is such that what you wind up with is a series of neoprene circles and metal rings, because everything is so tight and so precise, and you can't really afford to fuck around with things like verticality. The Marvel Crisis Protocol, where buildings don't even have rules, like there's a balance to be had there. But I look at games like Conquest, and I think to myself, it's a game of maneuvers. Conquest is. Rank and flank games in general, I think mostly they're games of maneuvers, more so than games where you have individual models that move around, which can go in any direction at any time. It's a game of maneuvers because units in Conquest have a certain inertia to them. When you move them into a position, you're locking yourself into a set series of potential movements that they can make in the next turn. So you have to be thinking ahead. And this is the strength of rank and flank gaming. But concordant with that, you also can't clutter the table a whole lot, because then you don't have any room to maneuver and the game becomes very, very boring.
Yeah, we generally don't play with more than like 4 pieces of terrain.
Exactly. You can't have a lot of fluffy random stuff. You can't have things that don't mean anything, because all the footprints matter in games like Conquest. Now, I love the Rune Wars. Rune Wars was one of my favorite games, and I love the way that they did the terrain in it, in the sense that they had big tokens that you would punch out of cardboard with pictures on them. And it was like, this is the terrain. If you enter the terrain, you just move your trays right into it. It can contain so many trays. And it was mechanically beautiful. I made a lot of 3D. I should have sent you pictures. I didn't think of that. I made a lot of 3D terrain carved out of foam by hand for Rune Wars when it was going on. And a lot of that has sort of inspired my work in Conquest. I only have a few pieces for Conquest right now that are finished. I have a number more that are on the way, including like defensive towers and positions and such. But
I was gonna say, for the love of God, do you have garrison terrain? There are so many rules for garrison.
Yes,
but they haven't.
The hills that I've made, which I've sent you pictures of, I made them specifically for Conquest. They're designed to function as garrison terrain more than zonal terrain. When I think zonal terrain, I think swamps or graveyards or forests. When I think zonal terrain, I think what you physically have on the table is a blob be it paper, be it neoprene, be it
Mhm.
plastic, be it 3D printed, and then you have a series of items that fill that blob, and you move them as necessary to move your unit through it smoothly. That's what I think of as zonal terrain. And when I think of things like hills, I think that should just be garrison terrain. It should just be something where the top footprint is the same as the bottom footprint, and you put your unit in it, and then the border of the terrain is just the border of your unit from that point on. So the hills that I've made for Conquest are designed to be played as zonal terrain, as well as some of the upcoming watchtowers that I'm working on. I have 2 that I'm currently working on, one for 100 Kingdoms, which is a very traditional stone bottom, wood top sort of guard tower that fits 4 trays. And I'm going to use trays instead of stands. I apologize. I still use Rune Wars terminology for that. And then I also have a Spires watchtower that I'm working on right now, which I've designed in my head. And I'll let you be the judge of this when I have renders ready to release. In my head, it looks like one of the roots from one of the spires that has grown out and punched up through the ground, flowered outwards, and then hardened into a bone-like structure.
Holy
Because
shit,
this-
that sounds cool.
In my mind, this is how the spires expand. It is
That's
very
right, for sure.
organically. It's like Cronenberg meets Giger.
Mhm.
So that's something that I'm working on right now. Right, the first few things I've made are naturalistic terrain, and then bases and trays, which goes right along with what I was saying. It's like I need a thing, so I make a thing, and then I make the thing available. I needed trays, I made trays, and now they're available. I have 2 sets of trays and bases that are available right now. I have one set called Fields of the Fallen, which is designed to apply to all factions fairly equally. It's essentially a dirt/muddy field that is littered with weapons and armor, specifically from the 100 Kingdoms, the Nords, the city-states, and the Wahadrun. I have picked pieces and sort of scattered them around. And then I have another one called Old Market Road, which is meant to be old, disused cobblestone road. I have another set in progress right now called the Fetid Glade, I think is what I've gone with for the name. That may change. And that is intended to be themed around the spires. It is a series of small organic nodes and little bony roots that are kind of growing through the bases so that you can have something to base your spires on that just sort of matches their aesthetic.
Yeah,
I'm planning on making more. It just takes time. I live rurally. I live on about 35 acres of land. I take care of it. So anytime I'm not outside, I'm usually sitting on my computer designing some stuff. But that's what I'm doing with Conquest right now, and I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, it's funny because I've been talking to one of the other Conquest Vanguards around here. I call him Other Rob. We need a better dynamic. Like, he's bigger than me, so maybe he should be Big Rob and I'm Little Rob.
Right.
Maybe I can be Manic Rob and he can be not Manic Rob. Anyways, so I learned he actually has a really nice high quality resin 3D printer, and he's printing out
Ooh.
a campaign map specifically for Webway Games. I'm supposed to be writing the campaign narrative for that, but it's coming out awesome. But
do you know what files he's using? I'm wondering if he's using like Hexhog.
I'm actually not sure. I wonder. I'll check when we take a break.
Okay.
In a bit.
I'm just curious because I know Hexhog has been used for a lot of like campaign maps. It's a great system.
Yeah. So I don't have a 3D printer, but it's really cool. I found him because I want one of your market stands because I have the 100 Kingdoms parade set. So they're all on like cobblestone and like fallen banners and carpet and stuff like that. And it'll match a bit more because I don't want to put them on like my normal grass rocky stands.
Understandably so.
You know what I mean?
And
So
if I can note one thing real quick that I just realized I didn't mention, I'm obsessed with quality in my gaming accessories, and I sent you a few pictures where you could probably demonstrate. Like, I designed a series of 3D printable trays that you can set
yes.
the basic. It's designed in such a way that you can take the basic trays and stands that come with your Parabellum War Games box, your starter box.
Mm-hmm.
And you can set your stands down into these trays and arrange yourself in like 2x3, 3x3, 2x2, what have you units. And the whole unit, the whole regiment is connected easily.
Yes.
And also then the 3D printable trays that I make will also fit into those, as well as having little magnetic puzzle piece connectors that you can use to connect individual regiments. It's textbook over engineering, but I am a little bit obsessed with little quality of life features like that, and the fact that all of my trays and my bases have sockets for small magnets, so that you can magnetize your units into their stands and then your stands together into regiments. Magnets are magic.
Yes, and
I just want to mention that.
Yes, no. Honestly, it's something worth mentioning because one thing I also play a lot of games as well, and one thing I do like about Kings of War is just how easy it is to move stuff, and it does get kind of a little complicated sometimes moving certain stands and all that, and not being able to connect them all. So it's nice that you can kind of do that footprint option if that's what floats your boat. So
yeah. It just makes the game flow a little smoother if you're into it.
Absolutely. Anything else you want to mention before we take a quick break and we move into our 100 Kingdoms talk?
Oh, I'm sure I've forgotten something, but I can't think of it now.
That's all right. You can mention it later. All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back and talk some 100 Kingdoms. All right, and we are back. We are going to be talking 100 Kingdoms. This is something we were supposed to do last episode, but we just reviewed the campaign book for about an hour and a half. But we're going to talk about it now. So, gentlemen, we all have experience with the 100 Kingdoms. I myself, I probably have about 2,500 points of 100 Kingdoms at this point. I have several games under my belts, and I feel very confident talking about the army. I know, Brett, you're just a lore sponge, and you've recently kind of dabbled in 100 Kingdoms. You got to see how cool the Household Guard were. And Thunderhead, what is your relationship with the 100 Kingdoms?
So I bought the starter set expecting to be a Spires player, and I wound up falling into the 100 Kingdoms. And this is going to sound a little funny, but because they're kind of so boring. And I'd like to explain that by referencing a game that I'm sure we're all familiar with, which is Age of Sigmar. Mm-hmm. In Age of Sigmar, when it first released, and still true to this day, though they're adding some more factions that make this less true, it's taken them a long time. In Age of Sigmar, the world is essentially populated, if you'll forgive my reductive remarks, by giant 9-foot-tall demons with flaming blood axes and chaos magic pouring out of their fucking eye sockets, and rat men and sadistic, hedonistic elves, and what we have to stand against them for the forces of good are 9-foot-tall supermen that shoot lightning out of their dicks, and that bores the Christ out of me. I don't care, like, at all. And I look at the 100 Kingdoms, I look at Conquest, I look at the role of the 100 Kingdoms within it, and I say, the Spires are fucking weird. Here we have this army of cloned slugs with bone spears being led by highborn, biologically armored biomancers and ferromancers and 30-foot-tall ant-men prisoner monster things with giant scything claws. And I'm like, what do I have? What do I have? Who am I in this world? What do we have to stand against these horrifying forces, these armies of Mesoamerican orcs riding Tyrannosaurus Rexes? What do we have to stand against this? And the answer is, his name's Roderick. He was born 50 miles from here. All of his teeth are rotten, and he has a spear. And I love it.
Yep.
It's so human. It serves as this amazing counterpoint to the wild extravagance and creativity of the Conquest universe, that the human faction within it is based strongly on, and I want to say that I will never use the phrase historically accurate because that's obviously insane, but they are strongly based on very real pieces of human history. You look at the men-at-arms, you look at the household knights, you look at the militia, and you see people. You see real people standing against horrors and creatures and monsters that are difficult to comprehend. And I feel that there's something meaningful there, something so much more meaningful and so much more evocative than 9-foot-tall golden supermen with lightning hammers. If that makes sense. This is my primary attraction to the 100 Kingdoms.
Yeah, that's definitely something I can agree with. How the 100 Kingdoms speak to, even if you're not a 100 Kingdom player, you still identify with them because they are so identifiable. They're just people. The rest of us are just people. Like, I'm a warehouse worker. Rob, you're a mental health worker. The guys that we're throwing on the table are the miller's son fighting alongside the butcher's son. You know, the butcher himself is a further back in the line. You know, you've got, you know, the dudes that were running around hunting for food for your village are now, you know, providing covering fire.
Your militia
at the archery
bowmen.
line. And, you know, yeah, you've got your highborn nobles with their plate armor and fancy swords, and you got your heavily armored, you know, household knights and all this shit, which, yeah, you know, that's the rich kid that you went to school with that you want to smack with your math book every day. That's him.
And if I may for just a moment and interject just one thing about the men-at-arms, it's specifically noted in the lore for the 100 Kingdoms men-at-arms that the fact that they have metal helmets, shields, armor, swords is historically unusual for the 100 Kingdoms and has more to do with the fact that the 100 Kingdoms is currently undergoing an economic revolution led by a newly emergent merchant class, which again links right back to that very real historical context where you wouldn't own a sword. Most people would never have enough money to own that much metal, but suddenly the common man is capable of owning these things thanks to this revolution within the 100 Kingdoms, and there are these bands of essentially mercenaries out there looking to earn some money for themselves and their families that make things like the men-at-arms like so much more interesting to me.
Mm-hmm. And that's the whole shtick with the 100 Kingdoms. You can buy them. Like, you can, whether you play them or not, you look at them and you just get it. You feel yourself in this army. Whether
very plausible.
Whether you're, exactly, very plausible. Whether you're driving the army or you're swinging at the army, you get it.
Which is a wonderful counterpoint to how wildly implausible literally everything else in the universe is. Because if you don't balance that, then it's just crazy shit. And if everything is crazy, then nothing is.
That's a thing that I've even tried to reflect in my own writing. You know, when I dabble in medieval fantasy, I frequently have common everyday people confronted with outrageous fantastical situation going, what the fuck?
What do you do?
Because that's
here's a stick. Go solve it.
I have a stick that can fly. That's my solution to whatever the flying fuck that is. Oh shit, it flies. Fuck.
That shouldn't happen. That's unusual behavior in a stick.
Right, and that's you know, I think the most appealing thing. Like, I think historically throughout my wargaming history is I've always liked human armies. You know, whether it's I'm playing the Imperium, whether it's I'm playing the Empire, you know, Kings of War playing Basileia, I think they're called. But, you know, I also, you know, I tend to also like the more humanoid things. Like, I like the elves, I like dwarves and stuff like that. And I tell people, you know, what army should I play? And I was like, well, how do you feel about human fighters? You know, a lot of people say, oh, that's so boring and cliche. I'm like, no, you know, for the reasons you stated, like when everything is so absurd and there's, you know, your buddy next to you who's a fire-breathing dragonborn and the person next to you who's a Goliath with a battle axe. You're just Jake with a sword.
Stick him with the pointy end.
Yes.
I've got my blade forged from the tooth of the dark dragon Galgathorax, and homeboy over here is like, I don't know, I sharpened the stick this morning. We'll see if it works.
I have armor. I sometimes, when I want to stab people, but they're all the way over there, I switch to my bow. So
you mentioned the like village hunters, and I'm actually painting militia bowmen right now, and that's what I keep thinking. Like, these men would be hunting deer.
Yep.
And for this moment, drawn into this battle by my theist priest, there's something more than that. But when they leave here, if they leave here, they're going to go back to hunting deer.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So
that's the way I even look at my own longbowman. I look at my longbowman and I think of, the overwhelming majority of King Henry V's army going into the Battle of Agincourt.
Mm-hmm.
So many, I think 80% of the English army at that point were longbowmen, and a lot of them were hardened criminals.
Professional soldiers historically were very rare.
Mm-hmm.
Levies would be very, very common, and most people who fought in some of the most famous battles in history, speaking specifically of European history, would have been just common folk who were essentially paying the debt that they owed for being allowed to live on and work the land.
Exactly. And my longbowmen, I look at them as highwaymen, robbers, thieves, murderers, rebels who were like, oh shit, we have a problem. Hey, there's a big price on these guys' head. We can waive that and be like, hey, come fight for us and we won't fucking hang you, maybe. And that's the story of my longbowman.
I like it. I haven't done any longbowmen myself yet. I think that might be... I got to build some Steel Legion, and then I'm going to get myself some longbowmen. I'm leaning very cavalry heavy at the moment.
Yes, that's actually the list I've had the most success with, is literally the Noble Lord mounted. I take the Lance, wedge formation, default take Arms Master on every single noble you have, because 15 points for Cleave 2 is stupid.
It really is.
then I fill my mainstay with Militia just so I can buy more horses, and I take, a unit of 5 to 7 horses in one unit with the Lord in it, and then I take a unit of 6 to 8 without the Lord in it. And I find, if we're going to go a little bit more into the tactics and how they play, I find 100 Kingdoms has the most success when there's bodies.
Yeah, they find it very easy, in my experience, to fill that first turn deployment with light infantry. That's what makes the Militia kind of more attractive to me than the Men-at-Arms, is just I'm going to probably have them on the board quicker.
Yeah, see, I love them both so much. There's lists I write where I have at least 18 stands of Men-at-Arms. Not in one unit, but just across the field.
Right, across the army.
Yeah, and it's man, I think so, you talked about the historical aspect of it and all that. I think the best thing to say about this army is it gosh, I'm trying to it doesn't have any bad choices. It's so well balanced, and I feel like when they're making a unit or something, they're like, okay, we're gonna release the Centura Avatara, they're comparing it to kind of the 100 Kingdom stuff. It's a
baseline.
Yes, it's an army of layers, and I do feel like it almost does play a bit like a historical army. I know you got a priest, I know you got a wizard, but other than that,
other than the chapter mage and the fact that the priest can throw fucking fireballs, there's not that much fantastical about them, and most of their tactics conform to things you can understand by understanding real-world battlefields. Even the use of spears and cavalry, because, man, those cavalry units, on that first turn that they hit so damn hard, and you really have to capitalize on that. So much of using the 100 Kingdoms cavalry is making that charge count for something. Doing it at the right time.
And honestly, it's even when they do get stuck in, they're defense 4 in the front. They're
tough as hell.
Honestly, there is arguments for taking a unit of 3 dudes and just putting them on some objective, because it's okay, you got to deal with 12 wounds of defense 4, or I'm just gonna score points.
And historically speaking, if we're talking about cavalry in a defensive sense, over the course of a battle which would last minutes to hours rather than days, a couple men on armored horses that are trained to do the high trot and kick their legs, this is hard to take down. Honestly, if they keep moving around a little bit, even a well-drilled infantry unit would struggle with that.
But I personally have found most success is when you have the bodies on the field. There's nothing wrong with taking 3 stands of Man-at-Arms, just to have them there. And that was actually one thing that helped me win my game against Josh's Spires, is the fact that I just had this block of like 3 stands of Men-at-Arms, and I think it was my 6 block stand of Men-at-Arms wiped out the Strix and whatever else was holding the objective, and they could leave and these guys could go on.
I haven't fought any Strix yet. I haven't encountered them yet, but I'm very curious to. My main opponent plays Spires, so I'm planning to encounter them soon. But
yeah, and it's funny because you talk about how you find that the 100 Kingdoms have a good present early game. It's like, man, most of my games are like blooded Nordless. So it's like that doesn't even matter because they're just like, all right, turn 1, everything's here. It's like, oh, okay.
Yeah. I haven't really fought the Nords. I can't speak to that.
So what units have you found most success with, Thunderhead? Like what is your go-to?
Honestly, Household Knights, they're so good. I've had mixed to the same experiences with Militia and Men-at-Arms as far as combat goes. I'm usually running, obviously, more stands of Militia. I like their support abilities. It means that they can have kind of a smaller front, which is always something to bear in mind. It's very difficult to maneuver wide units around the board. That's part of the give and take that is inherently built into the game. Men-at-Arms are, and this is, I'd like to compliment Conquest as a system, specifically in reference to the Men-at-Arms and the Militia, because this is something that again, I play a lot of different war games, and so I get a lot of different comparisons. A lot of games fall in love with their special units, and they have the basic units there, but they're so basic, and they move on to the advanced special units so quickly that they don't really get used anymore. They become old hat very, very quickly, or they're so bad compared to the special units that can potentially replace them that you just don't run them. Conquest does a good job of making the minimum numbers, the lowest numbers on the stat line, still meaningful if you play them in the right way, if you play them in the right numbers, if you play them in the right formation, if you play them to the right objective. And that's something that I appreciate about the game, is that there's Men-at-Arms and there's Militia, and you look at the Militia and you're like, well, they suck. Why would I run them? Well, not only are they cheaper, which is your basic balancing mechanic, but they have that wonderful support mechanic wherein they can support a narrower front with more trays behind, and also they're more likely to be on the board a lot quicker and move faster. So it is really a give and take with even your basic units, and that any war game is forcing players to make meaningful decisions, and the more meaningful those decisions are on a turn-by-turn basis, all the way back to list building, the better the game is, in my opinion. And when I'm building lists for Conquest, I feel like I'm making meaningful decisions the moment that I choose my warlord. And
absolutely.
I appreciate that, because when I pick my Theist Priest, I'm like, I gotta build something a little bit different than if I was gonna go solo with the mounted noble, the mounted noble lord. Obviously, we have the benefit with the new army rules from 1.5, which is so exciting.
Yeah,
that
what
we
do
can do.
What do you typically run?
So all I've done so far, because I've had limited games since 1.5, has been the dynastic alliances, and I have been using the Theist Priest as my secondary warlord, with the mounted noble lord as my primary warlord, with the intent of then having what's the other one? Not Servites, but Acolytes in with my militia units, so that for one turn I can activate, and I put my Theist Priest in with a bunch of Sicarii, which I'm using proxy 3D printed models for. I run them with the Death Cult upgrade so that they cause wounds when they're in contact, and then I just spend them as quickly as I can to inflict casualties.
Right.
But I have that one turn when I activate the Theist Priest supremacy ability, and I'm able to bless all of my militia bowmen, which just for one turn makes them a little bit scarier. And you really have to capitalize on that turn to make it work, I find. But the core of that army still remains the mounted noble lord and his amazing household knights. They're so good.
Yeah.
They hit like a fucking hammer.
Just
And they're great models.
Nice.
They're great models. They have a surprising amount of customizability to them. And we haven't mentioned so far the fact that Conquest made a huge risk when they decided to make their what's their scale? It's 35, 39 millimeters, something like that.
38 millimeter.
38 millimeter. Like, that's a big risk when you're making a new game, because what you're saying is, I don't give a shit if you can use my models to proxy in other games. And there's fundamentally something about, like, when a game company comes out and releases models and they're like, oh, you can proxy them to Warhammer 40K, there's a certain amount of a lack of confidence in their product that shows. And I think that consumers react to that. When you come out of the gate and you go, fuck you, you're going to play this game with my models and you're not going to proxy shit, this is what they're for. You're saying to the consumer base, I believe in what I'm doing. You're going to like this game. Pick it up and give it a try.
You know,
it's a risky maneuver, but so far it's working on me.
Go ahead, Brett.
So I actually wanted to speak in terms of models, and I think the 100 Kingdoms are the perfect illustration of this. Give me one moment. So...
All right. Well, Brett's doing that. You know, one thing I do find that's interesting, because you're all about militia, and honestly, I lean towards the Men-at-Arms. I feel like we could have a good half an hour discussion about the difference between these two mainstay units, and
they play different.
We'd be like, you know what, we're both right. And I think that's such
even
a compliment.
Aesthetically, you can just based on aesthetics, you can choose one or the other. And I have a major appeal to the rabble of the militia. Mm-hmm. You know, like, none of these people want to be here. None of them want to be here. Right. They would all rather be milking their cows, man. But here they are, and he's got a spear and he's got a helmet, and we're gonna make this happen.
All right, Brett, what's up?
So the 100 Kingdoms, I think, are the perfect illustration for this. So you look at, the Man-at-Arms sculpt.
Yes.
Very simple, kind of plain, maybe even a little goofy.
I think it's one of the first ones they did, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right, it's one of the absolute first. So then you move on up to the Household Guard, much more detailed, a little more lifelike, more believable. And then you go up to, like, the Longbowmen, which are so heavily detailed, so, positively exquisite models. And there's so many different ways you can build them, so much pizzazz just off the sprue.
The improvement is quantifiable. Right.
You can see the improvement.
This says to me,
across the board,
passion. Mm-hmm. This says to me, they care, because making models is not easy, and they jumped in feet first, and they made. And I'm going to be completely honest: the Men-at-Arms and the militia, the models are a little weak. They're a little weak in some parts. They're good. They're a little weak, particularly now that I'm painting the militia. I like them, but they got their weaknesses. And then you look at, like, the new Wahadran models, and it's like, oh, fuck you. That fucking Apex Predator, are you fucking kidding me? So I'm left kind of like, and like the Steel Legion look amazing. The Household Guard are phenomenal. The new, I'm so excited to get my hands on the Order of the Crimson Tower. They want to, that's the thing. Like, there are a lot of companies out there that they're just selling you garbage. The people at Parabellum War Games, I think they love what they're doing. Yeah, I think they love their lore. I think they love their universe, and I think they want to make good models, and that shows in how big the strides are between generations of figure.
Right. And, maybe if I can cap off this segment, with that, is I remember back in the day when I was a teenager going to Games Workshop, you could tell they were enthusiasts. They weren't great businessmen back in the day, but they, things changed. A lot of stores closed down and stuff like that, and then they had their resurgence, and they became businessmen and less enthusiasts. And I think that's one thing that's very refreshing about Parabellum, and I think that's one of the reasons. The fact that I had direct conversation through email with one of the designers. It's like, holy shit. That's so cool. That's so cool. He said my painted 100 Kingdoms were awesome. I'm like, thanks, man.
Yeah,
that's
they're excited about their product. They're excited about their product, and that excitement helps fuel mine, because I don't feel like I'm going to be, I as a painter or as a player, am going to be dropped. I feel like they intend to support this. And can I just add one point to that, to support what you just said? It's something I was talking about earlier today with somebody. I remember buying my 4th edition Warhammer, I'll say 5th edition. I remember buying my 5th edition Warhammer 40k core rulebook, and I remember flipping to the back, and you get to the hobby section. It's like, here's how you paint Ultramarines, here's how you paint Orcs, here's how you paint your Dark Eldar. And in the very back, there's a segment that's like, buy 2 sheets of foam board, get some PVA glue, get a little bit of sand from your local playground. Here's how you can build a bunker that you can fight in. Use these templates, cut them out, cut it, glue here, paint this, and you've got a bunker. And if you go to your local game store right now and you buy the latest edition of the Warhammer 40k rulebook and you flip to that exact same section, what will you find? You will find advertisements to buy their latest bunker or set of trees or Mechanicum generator and special rules that you can only use if you use the official Games Workshop branded product. And I cannot illustrate the difference between them then and them now any more clearly than that.
Right. Okay, folks, is there anything else we want to talk about 100 Kingdoms? So I guess maybe I'll add typically how I run my list nowadays. So for 1,500 points, which is typically what my group's going through, I've been experimenting with the Warlord. I usually run a unit of Bowmen. I use a run of Militia, and I do the 2 big blocks of horses. Then I like taking the Chapter Mage with the Dynastic Alliance. I like to give her healing. And I usually run a unit of 6 men-at-arms with the Seasoned Veteran, and then I do like 3-4 stands of just another man-at-arms just to kind of exist. Because once in a while, you just got to take a unit just to exist. Like, you
kind of a buffer.
Maneuvering, you talk about trading, right? Like a lot of...
No plan survives contact with the enemy.
Correct. So that's kind of what I've been running. I've been thinking about experimenting a bit with a Imperial Officer list, because I actually think low-key the Imperial Officer can run a pretty nasty shooting army, and I've been talking to Yasir, shout out to Yasir, another 100 Kingdoms player, and we've been talking about taking a Imperial Officer. You can either give him the Kiss Farewell, which gives him, I think, Deadly Shots, Barrage 3.
It's meant to be like a crossbow, isn't it?
Yeah, or a repeater crossbow, I think. But or he actually took, what is it? The Eye of Arceus, I think it's called. It's a 20-point item, and it makes all it's once per game. All units within 6 inches plus 1 volley.
I love the hero upgrades. I love all the artifacts and the heirlooms. They're so cool.
And then you give him Marksman, so all of a sudden he's like Barrage 5, and then you take Murderous Volley, stick him in a unit of Crossbowmen, Hunter Cadre, the Imperial Ranger Corps, and all of a sudden that unit is now causing morale tests on top of his like 5 shots with, either deadly aim or he's giving everyone +1 to hit for a turn. So,
can I? Let me just note one thing real quick. First of all, I love the idea of a shooting army in reference to the 100 Kingdoms, because I feel like that's, again, just buying into that sort of historical truth. We have these forces of, like, the noble Nords with their battle axes, and the Wahadrun with their obsidian spears and slingers and riding on their raptors, and then you have the 100 Kingdoms, and they're like, I'd like to survive today. Yes, I'll use this crossbow. This seems like a great idea. I love the theme of it. I have also been obsessively stringing all of my bows and crossbows on my models.
Yes, I
and
saw
adding
that.
Adding arrows and crossbow bolts to them. And I would just like to note, for those of you who might be on the fence about 3D printing, I don't know if this is the tiny thing that's going to push you over the edge, but I have strung a lot of model bows in my life because I'm an obsessive weirdo. And I have to say, when your FDM 3D printer, when it prints something, the first thing it's going to do is the nozzle is going to go to the side of the plate and it's going to prime. And it's going to go up and down in one line, and it's just going to pump out some PLA plastic to make sure that everything's flowing cleanly before the print starts. That little string of plastic that it makes is the greatest thing for doing strung bows on styrene models that I have ever used in my life. I cannot recommend it enough.
Yep. So gonna be experimenting, I think, with the Imperial Officer, thinking about doing a double Imperial Officer list. One who's gonna be based on like a shooty war band, and then the other is gonna be taking a flanking unit of either Gilded Legion, Steel Legion. So I'm probably gonna be experimenting with that a little bit. as
I'll be
well.
interested to hear your results on a shooty army, because like I said, I love the theme and I'd love to hear how it functions.
Yeah, because shooting isn't that powerful in this game, mostly because you don't take.
You don't get
morale.
those. Yeah, you don't get the morale tests.
But all of a sudden, when you put a dude murderous volley in, and maybe if I wasn't considering doing double Imperial Officer, maybe taking a cheap Noble Lord on foot, maybe putting him in Longbowman with dynastic alliances, all of a sudden now it's 30 inches with the shots.
I love the idea,
murderous
and I
volley.
want it to work. I want it to work.
Well,
And you're right; they're not quite as strong, but at the same time, you're not taking return hits.
It's
So the question becomes, how well can you hold objectives?
correct. Yeah, because that's the big thing, but then that's also why you take the things like the Gilded Legion, the Men-at-Arms. You need a lot of people in front, right?
You need
Because
that anvil.
Yes, you absolutely need an anvil. So that's I think we'll wrap it up for the 100 Kingdoms segment, and I guess before we move into our last segment, are there any shout-outs or plugs you want to give?
Shout out to Johnny Grogan, who I finally got to meet in person last weekend.
Hey!
A shout out to Thunderhead Studio with his cool stream where there's a bunch of artists and other people who hang out and pitch their shit.
All right, and I'll
Come check it out. It's a great time. We're on Twitch 3 days a week.
Yep, I'll splice your info in here, so you don't have to worry about plugging the whole thing. So I
appreciate
that. Shout out to our local vanguards. Shout out to Danny and Amy at the Armory for running Conquest on Thursday nights. Shout out to Cam and Wrath at Webway Games, who have started picking up Conquest. Shout out to Alpha Omega. We did demo day this Saturday, right? You were there, Brett.
Yep.
So, yeah, just shout out to all the local stores giving all that support and all that. If you want to fight me, you can find me anywhere there. That's in Conquest, not in real life. So
Come get some.
So I guess we will say goodbye and stick around for my little bit on Webway Games in Marlborough, Mass. Otherwise, everyone have a good night.
And a good night to you as well. Thank you for having me.
Sure. Raph,
Right.
you want to go first?
Sure, I will go first. My name is Raph. I'm the owner here at Webway Games, a new store that just opened up.
And I am Cam, the manager of said Webway Games in Marlborough, Mass.
Yep. We used to play at a different game store and our local game store closed. So we, over the pandemic, we just kind of brainstormed this idea to start our own place, and that's really where it spawned.
Yeah, I mean the perfect storm. We happened to the financials worked out for it to be a possibility. We were both semi between work at the time, and of course we lost our pseudo ancestral home as tabletop gamers. Our store being called left a big gap in our area. So so recently here in Marlborough, Mass, where the store is, there was a convention called ArmorCon that was just for us. This was before we had officially opened the store, and it's just 10 minutes down the road. So we figured there was no reason for us to not go check out the game. Or check out the con rather, and we got ourselves a booth, and it happened to be in a small room. It's a small con, and we were right next to the guys from Parabellum, who previously had reached out to us through a friend of ours, but we didn't really have time to look at the game because we were so busy, opening the store.
Yeah, getting everything ready.
So at the con, we, it was a bit slow at times, so we had a lot of time to talk to the guys from Parabellum. One of them being Rob and Josh from Surrender. And we sort of fell in love with the game, because the game is really fun and we enjoy it. But also they're great salesmen who work for the game, so that was part of it as well.
Yeah, definitively.
And then we ended up picking up at the end of the con most of their backstock that they were going to take back to HQ. And we brought it to our store for opening weekend, and we've had a great reception so far. And so we decided to, have those guys come down to run us a demo day, so that people could learn to play the game. We could get new people into the community, start our own community as a new store.
Yeah.
And it went really, really great.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, I think we've definitively fallen in love with the game at this point, and it seems to have a lot of community support around here, which is awesome.
Yeah.
I played Dwagum. Played only a couple of games at this point, but that is the army that I've just finished building.
I'm currently playing Spires as a longtime Tyranid player. I chose the most non-human faction that I could.
Yeah.
Really excited for Old Dominion coming in Q1 though.
Yeah, I'm super excited for Weavers, which should be coming at some point in the eventuality. Soon.
Yeah, as far as Conquest goes, starting on November 21st, which is a couple of weeks from us filming this today, we're going to start our organized play for Conquest, and we're going to start that by doing an Escalation League, where we're going to have everyone start at 600 points, because we have a lot of new players coming into the game. And then every 2 weeks after that, we're going to bump up a few hundred points and run that for a couple of months. And then we also have picked up all of the organized play stuff from Parabellum, which is tournament packs and paint and takes and stuff like that. So we're looking to run that.
Yeah, our plan is to run a Conquest event every Sunday or every other Sunday. So starting on the 21st, is it?
Yep.
And then every other Sunday from there will be something going on in the store.
Yeah, at noon is when we're going to try to start. But we're if you look at our store hours on our website and stuff, we're night people. We're usually here way later than we should be. So.
For sure.
Yeah, you can find us at webwaygames.com. That's our website.
Yeah.
You can find us on all of our social medias, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We're all Webway Games.
Yep.
And we should, in the future, as we're a new store, we have a whole bunch of equipment here to stream and stuff, and we're going to be streaming our tournaments and our local events and stuff.
Yeah, so any big events are eventually going to get put on to our YouTube channel.
And you can find that at youtube.com/webwaygames, probably.
Probably.
I don't think they gave us a URL yet.
Great.